Welcome to Undercover Truths, where facts come first. Hit subscribe and stay informed.
You're about to hear something that should never have happened in America. A soldier's plea, a father's desperation, and a system that listened, then looked away. Tonight, we expose what unfolded behind closed doors, inside a family courtroom where warnings were ignored, and 3 little girls paid the price with their lives. September 12, 2024. The family court hearing that changed everything. Newly released audio captures a voice trembling, pleading. It's Travis Decker, an Army veteran, a father of 3. And in that moment, he wasn't the man hiding in the wilderness. He wasn't the fugitive every headline would later scream about. He was just a dad, begging for time with his daughters. The judge listened, the judge agreed. And weeks later, Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia were dead. You have to hear what happened in that courtroom to understand the outrage. Travis told the judge, and these were his exact words.
When I was separated from my original active duty, I came out into the civilian world and tried to figure out a way that I could live as a civilian. I didn't have family, I didn't have friends, I didn't have any support, especially coming to a state where I didn't have anybody to lean on or a couch to go sleep on. So when we initially went through our divorce, I went and put the uniform back on full time so I could support myself and support the family through the first big transition of dad not being at home anymore. Once I fulfilled my year obligation, I talked to my chain of command and stepped down from full active duty and transitioned into, my contract ended in December of 2023. Starting over is hard and I'm starting at the bottom and I've got a long way to go, but I don't think that it should restrict the time that I get to be around my daughters. Since I have been gone, every time I've had the girls, we have been in campsites in national forests and paid campsites that have campers. We've never done anything that was unsafe or anything I wouldn't want to put myself in. I understand that my current position when I'm by myself isn't ideal, but my daughters aren't a part of that. I only get to see them over the weekends, and camping is something that the 4 of us have done since the 3 of them were in diapers. I've never done anything I feel like that puts them in any sort of a risk that most families in the state of Washington, every campsite we've been to in the last month have been almost completely booked out or sold out because everybody's out this time of year. When I stepped away from the National Guard, I was making $86,000 a year, and now I think it's like $38,000 a year. So when you start over from zero and you don't have help in a hand to get you through it, it makes it a little more difficult.
Your Honor, these visits are all I have left. Don't take them from me. My girls need me. I'm getting help. I'm stable. I promise. That promise was a lie. Or maybe it wasn't a lie in his mind. Maybe he believed it. But his ex-wife, Whitney, didn't. She had spent months raising alarms. She told the court, the mediator, the guardian ad litem, he's not well. He's angry. He's unpredictable. He's isolating the girls. They're scared. Whitney didn't stay quiet. She documented everything. But the system decided those words didn't outweigh his service record, his charm in the courtroom, or the hollow assurance that he was in counseling. They let him keep the visits. They didn't check if he was actually in treatment. They didn't check if he was taking medication. They didn't check anything. They just stamped the order and walked away. If you're asking how this could happen in 2024, you're not alone. Because every piece of evidence shows the failures were everywhere, from family court to the VA. This wasn't a sudden snap. This was a slow collapse. A collapse everyone saw coming, but nobody stopped. And here's what makes it worse. The family wasn't silent. Other relatives noticed the change too. His own sister told investigators later he wasn't the same after his last deployment. He'd lose track of conversations. He'd go days without sleeping. When he did sleep, he'd wake up screaming. These were red flags, and every agency knew, the courts, the VA, even law enforcement, because the calls were on record. There were reports of paranoia, of rage over custody, of threats he swore were jokes. And yet, visitation stayed in place. No supervised visits, no restrictions, nothing. So what happened after that September hearing? The visits continued. And behind closed doors, the pressure built. Friends said Travis was unraveling. He stopped answering texts, stopped showing up for his counseling sessions, the same sessions he swore he was attending when he faced the judge. And then, the weekend of May 24th, 2024, the girls spent the night with their dad. No alarms, no welfare checks. The order was clear. These visits were legal. By Monday morning, all 3 girls were gone, and the father who said he'd never hurt them disappeared into the mountains. We now know what happened in those final hours, at least some of it. The campsite in the Cascade Wilderness tells the story nobody wants to imagine. 3 small sleeping bags, a half-empty bag of marshmallows, tiny shoes lined up next to a fire pit. Their last night alive was a night of s'mores and songs, according to what investigators pieced together. And then, silence. Did they fall asleep under the stars, unaware their lives were ending? Or did they sense something was wrong? Did they cry for their mom? Did they ask why Daddy was crying? Because, yes, investigators believe he cried that night. They found tissue soaked in tears near the tent. Why? Guilt? Panic? We don't know. And we may never know, because the only person who can answer that is gone. The FBI search was massive at first. Drones, dogs, tactical teams combing the ridges near Leavenworth. The press called it the largest manhunt in Washington that year. But now, the search is over. The campsite is shut down. The official line is that no credible threat remains. No credible threat? How can they say that when the man trained to survive in combat, a man who lived through war zones, walked away from that camp without leaving a body behind? The FBI confirmed finding human remains nearby, but they won't say if they belong to Travis Decker. Tests are pending, they say. Always pending. Always waiting. Waiting was the theme of this entire case, and it killed 3 children. And here's what we have to face. This isn't just a story about one man's breakdown. It's a story about what happens when we put soldiers on pedestals and then abandon them when the uniform comes off. He was decorated. He saw combat. He carried trauma no one wanted to see. He asked for help. He begged for therapy. And what did he get? Voicemails. Backlogs. Next available appointment is 3 months out. 3 months. That's an eternity for someone hearing voices, for someone with rage boiling inside, for someone whose world is collapsing in a custody battle. He wasn't treated. He was triaged. By the time the court date came, the VA was still processing paperwork, and the family court, they didn't care. They didn't want to look like they were punishing a veteran. That bias, that blind faith in his hero image, cost 3 little girls their lives. And now, newly released court audio is forcing the country to hear what the judge heard, to feel the weight of that decision. And the public is furious, because you can hear it in his voice. Travis wasn't okay. He sounds desperate, defensive, like a man at the edge. And the judge still said yes, still handed him the time that would become a death sentence for Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia.
And if you think the court hearing was the only warning, you're wrong. There were more than anyone wants to admit. The people closest to Travis saw the change long before that September day. He wasn't just exhausted, he was hollowed out. Former Army buddies told investigators he'd been pushing everyone away. One described him as a ticking clock with no hands. You never knew when it would go off. He carried every scar from deployments, every image burned into his head from years in combat zones. But when he came home, there was no landing pad. No soft place to fall. The VA gave him pamphlets. He needed doctors. He got voicemails. And the court, they didn't even request his medical records. No one asked if his claims of therapy were real. The visitation order went through on nothing but his word, and the court called that due process. It was bureaucracy protecting itself, not children. When Whitney begged them to reconsider, they told her she was overreacting, that she needed to cooperate for the sake of the kids. She did, and her cooperation became a death sentence for her own daughters. Family members tried to intervene too. Travis's mother told police she'd been worried about his mental health for years. She described sudden rages, days where he wouldn't answer calls, nights when he'd ramble about things that didn't make sense. A cousin told reporters he had shown up at their house last winter in full camouflage gear, saying he was training for something big. Nobody thought to alert the court. Nobody thought the visitation order needed another look. And why? Because Travis was a veteran. In America, that title still grants immunity, even when the signs are flashing red. What about the girls? Investigators believe they sensed something wasn't right. Peyton had told her teacher that Daddy gets sad and mad a lot. Evelyn had started clinging to her mom at drop-offs. Olivia, barely old enough to talk, would cry when it was time to leave. These weren't small hints, they were alarms. And yet every professional who touched this case, the guardian ad litem, the visitation monitor who wasn't even assigned full-time, the family court judge, all of them checked the box and moved on. This wasn't protection. This was negligence dressed as procedure. The FBI search itself exposed another failure. When the girls were first reported missing, local law enforcement waited hours before declaring it an emergency. Hours. Because technically, Travis had visitation rights. There was no official crime. Even after Whitney begged them to act, even after she told them he'd threatened to take the girls and disappear, officers followed policy. Wait and see. By the time the search finally started, Travis had a full day's head start. A soldier trained in evasion, a man who knew the Cascades better than most hikers. You can guess how that turned out. Now we know more about that campsite. New photographs, never before released, show the scene exactly as FBI agents found it. Food wrappers, a burned log with small handprints and ash, a lantern still on, its batteries drained, and next to it, a single Army-issued blanket. That detail wasn't in the initial press release, but it matters because it suggests something chilling. Travis brought military gear into the woods. He planned this. He didn't just snap. He prepared, down to the last detail. He wanted to control what happened in those final hours. And yet, the public is still waiting on DNA confirmation to know if the boons found nearby are his. Weeks later, no answers. Always waiting. The case has now sparked outrage far beyond Washington state. Veteran advocacy groups are pointing to Travis Decker as proof of systemic collapse, a man who asked for help and got lost in paperwork. But child protection advocates see something else, a family court system that bends over backwards to protect parents' rights, even when those rights put children in harm's way. One attorney put it bluntly, "We've built a machine that assumes every parent deserves access, no matter how dangerous they are, until they actually kill their kids. Only then does anyone admit a mistake." Harsh words, but in this case, impossible to ignore. And then there's the newly released audio. You've heard part of it already, but there's more. At one point, the judge even asks Whitney why she's so opposed to unsupervised visitation. Listen carefully to what comes next. Travis interrupts. He tells the court she's exaggerating because she wants full custody. She's poisoning the girls against me. That moment matters because the judge believed him, not her. Even though she provided documentation of his missed therapy sessions, even though she gave statements from relatives confirming his behavior was deteriorating, the court decided she was the problem, not the father who would soon take his children into the wilderness and never bring them home. Why does this keep happening? Why do mothers get labeled as hysterical, while fathers, especially those with military service, get the benefit of the doubt? This isn't an isolated case. This is a pattern repeated in family courts across the country, a pattern where fathers' rights outweigh child safety. And this time, 3 children are dead because of it. Meanwhile, FBI sources say they're scaling back the search. They claim there's no evidence Travis Decker is alive. But what does that mean? No evidence isn't proof, and when you consider his training, his ability to survive in combat zones without supplies, it's hard to believe he just vanished without a trace. If he's alive, he's watching this investigation unfold. He knows exactly how much the public knows. And if he's dead, the system will breathe a sigh of relief and close the case without ever asking why the warning signs were ignored in the first place. So where does that leave us? 3 children gone. A father either dead or in hiding. A mother shattered, still asking why nobody listened. And a government scrambling to explain how they let this happen, while court officials hide behind legal jargon and claim everything was done by the book. But when the book itself is broken, following it isn't justice. It's complicity. The questions keep piling up, but the answers are nowhere to be found. Federal agents won't say why it took days to release details about the campsite. Local police are refusing to clarify whether they ever searched Travis's home before the girls disappeared. And the court that gave him access to his daughters? Silent. No statements, no accountability. These are the same officials who called this case tragic but unforeseeable, even after Whitney stood in that courtroom and begged them to intervene. She didn't whisper, she didn't hint, she said it outright. He's unstable, and the girls are not safe, and the system looked away. Military records now confirm Travis had been evaluated twice for post-traumatic stress, once while stationed overseas, and again after his return. In both cases, the Army recommended ongoing care, but once he left the service, that care was handed off to the VA, and the VA handed him a waiting list. Documents obtained by investigative reporters show he missed 6 appointments because they were scheduled months apart with no follow-up when he didn't show up. One internal memo even describes his case as low priority. A combat veteran with documented trauma, low priority. What does that say about how we treat the people we send into war zones? And what does it say about the children forced to live with the consequences when those wounds go untreated? Travis's father has now spoken publicly. He admitted that in the weeks before the tragedy, Travis seemed different. He talked about taking the girls somewhere no one could find them. He told his father he felt hunted by people who weren't real. This isn't speculation. It's sworn testimony to investigators. Yet no one connected these dots in time. Why didn't his own family step in? Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they thought the court would handle it. But the court didn't. They stamped his visitation order and moved to the next case, as if these were just paperwork problems. These were not paperwork problems. These were 3 lives waiting to be saved, and nobody bothered to try. Let's talk about those last moments. Investigators believe the girls spent at least 1 full night at the campsite before the end. They found juice boxes, coloring books, and a half-empty bag of marshmallows. Evidence suggests Travis kept them calm, at least for a while. But forensic experts are now analyzing traces of medication in the fire pit ash. Did he sedate them? Did they even understand what was happening? These are the questions investigators won't answer. These are the questions that haunt Whitney every single day. In an interview last week, Whitney said something chilling. I felt like I was handing them over to die every time I buckled them into his car. Think about that. A mother who knew, and still no one in power believed her. What does that say about our courts? About how we value the instincts of a parent who sees danger coming? Experts on family law call this a recurring problem. Mothers raise alarms, and judges accuse them of exaggerating to win custody. In other words, the system assumes malice where there is only fear, until it's too late to tell the difference. And now, the newly released audio paints an even darker picture. In it, Travis pleads with the judge to keep visitation. He tells the court, "I've done everything they've asked. I'm seeing someone. I'm fine." But court records show he wasn't seeing anyone. The VA confirmed he hadn't attended a single counseling session in 6 months. So who verified his claims? No one, because the court never checked. They took his word and dismissed Whitney's. One decision, one unchecked statement, and now 3 children are dead. Meanwhile, the FBI confirms bones found near the campsite are being analyzed for DNA. Early reports suggest they're human, but no official identification yet. If they're Travis's, it means he never left that site. If they're not, then where is he? A man trained to survive off-grid, a man who studied escape and evasion techniques as part of his military career. Can we really believe he simply lay down and died in the woods? Or is he out there, watching this unfold, knowing every second buys him more time? The agencies won't say. They've shut down the campsite, closed off access to journalists, and stopped answering questions. When a reporter pressed an FBI spokesperson about why the search slowed so quickly, the response was only 2 words: no comment. This case is bigger than one man. It's bigger than one family. It exposes a failure that runs through every level of government. The Army documented his trauma. The VA delayed his treatment. The court ignored the warnings, and law enforcement waited to act until it was too late. Nobody will admit fault. Nobody will say they could have done more. But if everyone did their job, why are 3 little girls dead? Why are their mother planning funerals instead of birthday parties? This is where the story turns from tragedy to outrage, because what happened to Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia Decker wasn't an accident. It was a chain reaction of institutional neglect, a chain built link by link until it strangled 3 innocent lives. And still, the people who forged those links walk free, writing statements about how they followed procedure. If this is procedure, how many more families are next? How many more warnings will courts dismiss? How many more veterans will slip through the cracks until their pain explodes onto the people closest to them? Stay tuned, because the next revelations in this case are even more damning. The internal emails, the court transcripts no one wanted you to hear, and the disturbing possibility that Travis Decker didn't act alone.
Stay with us, because this case isn't just about the past. It's about what happens next, and what happens when a government that promises support for veterans delivers nothing but excuses, and a court system that swears to protect children hands them over to a storm it refuses to see. This is the story of Travis Decker, a soldier, a father, a fugitive, and the story of 3 daughters whose last bedtime was a campground in the woods because every safeguard failed them. And as for justice, that part hasn't even begun.